If you've ever tried woodworking for the first time, you probably know this moment. You pick a project that looks simple online, maybe a small shelf, a cutting board, or a simple wooden bench. You buy the wood, you clear your weekend. You imagine how satisfying it's going to feel to build something with your own hands, but then something strange happens. Around the second or third step, things stop making sense. A measurement doesn't match the diagram, the pieces don't line up the way they should, and suddenly that easy project starts feeling a lot more complicated than you expected. So you double-check everything. You measure again, you cut again, you try to fix it. But the more you work on it, the more frustrating it becomes. And eventually that half-finished project ends up sitting in the corner of your garage, collecting dust. And at some point you start wondering, maybe woodworking just isn't for me. But here's the truth that most beginners never hear. Woodworking isn't hard. In fact, thousands of people start building beautiful projects every single day, even with basic tools and very little experience. The real problem is something most beginners never think about. They don't fail because they lack skill. They fail because they start with the wrong projects and the wrong plans. And if you're just getting into woodworking, choosing the right first projects can make the difference between giving up in frustration or discovering one of the most satisfying hobbies you'll ever learn. Because the truth is, when you start with the right projects, woodworking becomes a lot simpler than most people think. And in this video, I'm going to show you a few easy woodworking projects for beginners that are perfect if you're just starting out and want to build something real, step by step. One of the best ways to start woodworking is by choosing projects that are simple, practical, and actually useful in your daily life. Because when your first project turns out well, something interesting happens. You gain confidence, you start understanding how wood behaves, how tools feel in your hands, and suddenly the whole process becomes enjoyable instead of intimidating. A great first project for beginners is something as simple as a cutting board. It might sound basic, but it teaches you several important skills at the same time. You learn how to make clean, straight cuts. You learn how to sand wood properly. And you learn how to apply a finish that brings the grain to life. And the best part is that when you're done, you end up with something you can actually use every day in your kitchen. Another excellent beginner project is a floating shelf. Floating shelves are perfect because the design is simple, but the result looks surprisingly professional. You only need a few pieces of wood, a drill, and some basic tools. With a good plan to follow, you can cut the pieces, assemble them, mount them on the wall, and in just a few hours you have something that completely transforms a room. And then there's another classic beginner project that teaches some very important fundamentals of woodworking: a small wooden stool. A stool may look simple, but it teaches you something extremely important: structure. You learn how pieces connect together, how to make sure everything is square and balanced, and how small details in the assembly can make the difference between something that feels fragile and something that feels solid and well built. Projects like these are perfect because they help you understand the basics without overwhelming you with complicated techniques. And once you finish your first project, something interesting usually happens. You start looking around your house and thinking, maybe I could build that. A shelf for the garage, a small bench for the garden, a nightstand for the bedroom. Little by little, woodworking stops feeling like something complicated and starts feeling like something creative. But this is exactly the moment where many beginners run into the same frustrating problem. And it has nothing to do with tools or talent. It has to do with the plans they're following. And if you've ever tried building something using random plans you found online, you probably already know exactly what I mean. The problem many beginners run into isn't a lack of motivation or tools. Most of the time, the real problem is the plans they're trying to follow. A lot of people start by searching online for free woodworking plans, and at first glance they often look great. Nice pictures, clean diagrams, maybe even a list of materials. But once you actually start building, things begin to fall apart. Sometimes a measurement doesn't match the drawing. Sometimes an important step is missing. Other times the instructions jump from one stage to another without explaining what happens in between. And suddenly you're standing there in your workshop trying to figure out what the person who designed the project meant. So you improvise. You try to guess the next step. You make a cut that seems right, and then realize the pieces don't align the way they should. Now the wood you bought is already cut, and fixing the mistake means starting over. It's frustrating, especially when you were excited about the project in the first place. This is actually one of the biggest reasons many beginners give up on woodworking much earlier than they should. Not because they aren't capable, but because they're working with plans that were never properly explained or tested. Over time, a lot of woodworkers discover that following clear, detailed plans makes a huge difference. Instead of trying to interpret vague diagrams or incomplete instructions, you simply follow the steps, cut the pieces according to the measurements, and assemble everything in the right order. That's why many beginners eventually start using collections of structured woodworking plans that walk through each project step by step. It removes a lot of the guesswork and lets you focus on what actually makes woodworking enjoyable, building something with your own hands and seeing the project come together, piece by piece. Once you start working with clear plans, something interesting happens. The whole experience of woodworking changes. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out what the next step should be, you already know exactly what needs to happen next. The measurements are there, the materials are listed, the cuts are explained, and suddenly the process becomes much smoother. You're not guessing anymore, you're simply building. That's why many woodworkers eventually start using complete libraries of woodworking plans instead of trying to piece things together from random sketches online. When every step is clearly laid out, from the first cut to the final assembly, even beginners can build projects that look clean, solid, and professional. Instead of spending your weekends searching for plans that might work, you can spend that time actually building something. A shelf for your living room, a small bench for the backyard, a storage cabinet for your garage. Project after project, your skills grow naturally because each build teaches you something new. And one of the most interesting things about woodworking is that once you complete your first few projects, you start seeing possibilities everywhere. A table you want to build, a cabinet that would fit perfectly in a corner of your house, a gift you could make for someone in your family. What once felt complicated suddenly becomes something you genuinely enjoy doing. If you're someone who's interested in getting into woodworking or improving your skills, there are resources out there that give you access to thousands of step-by-step woodworking plans designed for beginners, as well as more advanced builders. If you want to explore something like that, I've left a link in the pinned comment where you can take a look and see if it's something that might help you get started. And remember, the most important step in woodworking isn't having the perfect workshop or expensive tools, it's simply choosing your first project and starting to build. Woodworking has a unique way of changing how you see everyday things. Once you build your first project, you start noticing the craftsmanship behind furniture, shelves, and cabinets around your home. What once seemed complicated suddenly feels possible, and every new project becomes an opportunity to learn something new. And the truth is, you don't need a huge workshop or expensive equipment to begin. Many great woodworkers started in a small garage or even a corner of a room with just a few basic tools. What really makes the difference is having a clear plan and the confidence to take that first step. If you're interested in exploring more beginner-friendly projects and step-by-step woodworking plans, you can check the link in the pinned comment below. It's a resource that gives access to thousands of detailed plans for all kinds of projects, from simple beginner builds to more advanced pieces once your skills grow. Take a look if you're curious and see if it's something that could help you on your woodworking journey. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more simple woodworking ideas, beginner projects, and practical tips to help you build with confidence, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes all it takes to start a new hobby is building that very first project.